Hey, folks. It's Nathaniel Stinnett with the Environmental Voter Project. And today we have a mini briefing on what we're seeing in our data in Texas. For those of you who aren't familiar with our organization, the Environmental Voter Project is a national nonprofit that works with thousands of volunteers to identify people who care deeply about climate and the environment who aren't voting. And then we mobilize them to turn them into more consistent voters because we think this is the fastest, most effective way to build the political power of the climate movement. I'm noticing I've got some scruff here. Please forgive me. It's GOTV. We're working round the clock here at the Environmental Voter Project. And today we want to get into what we are seeing in our data in Texas. All right, to start, you'll see we've identified over 710,000 climate voters who are already registered to vote in Texas, yet we think they're unlikely to show up this fall without being mobilized to do so. Why do we think that? Because when we look at their public voting histories, they did not vote in the 2020 presidential election or any election since then. So to reiterate, we have identified 710,000 registered voters in Texas who care deeply about climate and the environment, yet they are unlikely to vote this fall without being mobilized to do so. How big is a number like that in Texas? Well, only 631,000 votes decided the presidential election in Texas 4 years ago. So this population of low propensity environmental voters is larger than Donald Trump's margin of victory 4 years ago in Texas. Texas is a competitive state this year. The presidential election is not considered super tight there, but it is competitive. The US Senate race is even more competitive, and we're going to get into that in a second. And the Cook Political Report says that there are 3 competitive US House races. In-person early voting starts in Texas on October 21st and goes through November 1st. There has been absentee and mail voting for older voters and absentee voting for all voters running already. All right. What does this population of low propensity environmental voters look like in Texas? Please look at this chart at the bottom here. First, let's start with the very, very bottom row that says reg voters. What this is it's a demographic breakdown of all registered voters in Texas. So this is how you read this line here. Let's look at that first number, 11.6. What that means is 11.6% of registered voters in Texas are between the ages of 18 to 24. Let's move over to another category here. 54.4% of registered voters in Texas are white. All right, we give that to provide a baseline for you. This is what the overall electorate looks like in Texas. Now look at the next row up that says LPEVs. These are these 710,000 low propensity environment first voters who we're trying to mobilize. And if you look at the demographic cross-section of this group, some things really stand out. The first thing is, look how young they are. Almost 90%, so 89% of these low propensity environmental voters are below the age of 35. These low propensity environmental voters are disproportionately young. And you might say, oh, well, Nathaniel, of course they're young. We all know that people who care deeply about climate and the environment are young. Yeah, but we don't see numbers this big in our other states. Almost 9 out of every 10 of these low propensity environmental voters are under the age of 35. So this is a really, really young population. And maybe another way to think about this is look at that 50 to 64 age range. Fewer than 1% of low propensity environmental voters are between the ages of 50 to 64. So this gives you an idea of how young this population skews. Okay, now look at the sex data. You'll see in the underlying electorate in Texas, there is a gender gap like there is in most states, where the overall electorate in Texas skews 5 points towards women. So there are 5 percentage points more women than men in the electorate in Texas. But now look at the low propensity environmental voters. That grows from a 5 percentage point gender gap to a 15-point gender gap. So these low propensity environmental voters in Texas are also disproportionately made up of women. Third thing to notice, look at the racial breakdown. Texas is a majority white electorate. 54.4% of registered voters in Texas are white. But our target population at the Environmental Voter Project, these low propensity environmental voters, only 37% of them are white. So this target population that's disproportionately made up of people of color is largely being driven by Black voters being overrepresented in our target population, and AAPI, or Asian American and Pacific Islander voters, being overrepresented. Also, you'll notice that Hispanic voters are about 5.5 percentage points more represented in our target population. That's not an enormous difference, but it is a difference. All right, so to reiterate, these 710,000 low propensity environmental voters in Texas have a lot of potential political power. It's a larger pool than even the margin of victory was 4 years ago for Donald Trump. And they are disproportionately young, disproportionately female, and disproportionately people of color. You will also notice they are disproportionately concentrated in urban areas. That's not surprising. We see that in most places. But, oh my gosh, is there an enormous number around Austin? Much more so than we see around Houston and Dallas and other urban areas. And this leads me to a really important point. You know, at the Environmental Voter Project, we're active in 19 different states. And we're only active in states where we've identified huge numbers of non-voting environmentalists. Yet, there is something special about Texas. In only 4 cities across our 19 states have we found such densely packed communities of these low propensity environmental voters that it makes a lot of sense for us to do door-to-door canvassing to talk to them. That's Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Tucson, Arizona, and Austin, Texas. This grouping right here, there are so many low propensity environmental voters there that are easy to reach by door knocking. So that's another very, very special opportunity for the climate and environmental movements in Texas. All right. When we look at the presidential race, this is the polling average. This is data and imagery taken from 538.com. You'll see the average of polling data, except for a little bump right after Labor Day, has stayed pretty even. Donald Trump is up 6.5 percentage points in the average of polls on Kamala Harris. The U.S. Senate race between Colin Allred and Ted Cruz is a little bit tighter. And you'll see it's been getting tighter even as undecideds have been making up their minds. And so you see both candidates are getting more and more support the closer to Election Day. Again, I would not claim this is the closest race in the world, but it is closer than a lot of people realize. And if the polling average is 3.8 percentage points, that is not only within the margin of error, it is also within the margin of effort, by which I mean volunteers could make all the difference. Currently in Texas, we are looking to raise $45,000 more just to meet our baseline budget. The baseline budget is pretty robust, but we need to raise $45,000 more just to finish for paying for the digital ads that we've created and we want to put in the field to mobilize these 710,000 low propensity climate voters. However, based on our previous experiments, we believe that we can actually go beyond that 45,000 and raise and efficiently spend 280,000 additional dollars before we reach a point of diminishing returns. Or another way of putting that is only after raising and spending another $280,000 in Texas will we start creating fewer new votes per dollar spent. So we will put donation links in the notes for this video. Please take a moment to rush a donation to us. Texas is an important state for the presidency, even more so for the U.S. Senate, even more so for the U.S. House, not to mention really important local and state legislative races. As I also mentioned, we are phone banking and especially canvassing in Texas. You can sign up on Monday, October 21st, the first day of early voting in Texas, to phone bank these voters. You can go to environmentalvoter.org to do that. Also, you'll see on the next two Sundays, so Sunday, October 27th and Sunday, November 3rd, we will be doing canvassing in Austin. And for all 5 days leading up through Election Day, we're going to be calling into Texas and all of our other states during the 5 days of GOTV. So please go to the links in this video. Take a moment to donate to support our Texas efforts. Take a moment to volunteer on a phone bank or door-to-door canvassing. And if you like getting quick mini briefings like this, subscribe to our YouTube page and you'll get a notification whenever we drop a new video. Thank you so, so much, especially to all of our tireless volunteers and our generous donors. We are making an enormous difference, not just in places like Texas, but in all 19 of our states because of you. Thanks. Have a good day, folks.